Hailing frequencies open, and welcome to Enterprising Individuals, the Star Trek discussion podcast that boldly goes into excruciating detail about the series, characters, and stories of the Star Trek universe. I'm your host, Aaron Coker, aka Caliban, and if Kirk gets the center seat, I'll take Charles Nelson Riley for the block. I'm joined once again on this episode by Pete the Retailer. Pete is the host of the Star Wars Minute, a daily podcast where he and co-host Alex Robinson analyze, scrutinize, and celebrate the Star Wars movies, 1 minute at a time. He's also the co-host of ABCD TOS, a podcast examining Star Trek, the original series, in alphabetical order, from all our yesterdays to Wolf in the Fold. Pete, welcome back to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me. Thanks for thinking of me.
Yeah, it's great to have you back on board. And today we'll be talking about Star Trek, the motion picture, the first feature film of the Trek franchise. When Star Trek's last episode, Turnabout Intruder, aired in June of 1969, not only was the writing on the wall for the series, but the wall itself had been torn down and the whole house had been demolished. Intruder was airing during June reruns because it had been preempted in March, and in any case, the series itself had been canceled back in February. Star Trek was dead on TV, but it lived on in the hearts of its fans, inspiring conventions, fanzines, and an animated series featuring the original cast. It also lived on through reruns, and its success in syndication inspired Paramount to try and adapt the series for a feature film. The story gets incredibly complicated from there, but the end result was an impressive film by an Oscar-winning director that added to the tapestry of the sci-fi cinema of the 70s, and in its own way secured the foundations of a franchise that has, for 55 years, continued to chart the human adventure and to slowly circle the Enterprise in dry dock. But we'll talk about that a little later in the show. First, Pete, it's great to have you back on the show. And I want to say I'm a big fan of your podcast, ABCD TOS, that you do with Tom and John and Joe. And it's one of the few Star Trek podcasts that I listen to personally. And one of the reasons that I like it so much is the great chemistry between the hosts. And you're talking about Star Trek, which I love, but you're also talking about 60s and 70s television and films and the shows and the stars from that era, which I also love.
Yeah, it came together. I think I've told this story before, but it came together basically after we did another show earlier called ABC Devo, where we went through all the songs by the band Devo in alphabetical order. And
yeah,
then we just sitting around trying to figure out, all right, well, what coming up with other bands that we could do that for. There were no bands that all four of us were on the same page for. And then it just like, well, when we are talking, a lot of the time we bring up stuff about Star Trek. Like, what about Star Trek? and yeah, then it just kind of clicked into place. So we went for anybody looking for good way to good established chemistry is do a different show first. That's recommended.
Yeah, right. A pilot show.
Right.
For the other show.
Yeah, and then I'm we're all close in age, but I happen to be technically the youngest out of the crew, so it's a good drawing from, because none of us are the age to have watched Star Trek in its original run.
Yeah.
We're all, children of, and this movie is part of it, but we're all children of kind of the aftermath of that, and that, and so to kind of get that, we're in a good spot where we're talking about kind of what was, in between, basically. We all grew up kind of in between. In Star Wars lingo, we would call that kind of the Dark Ages, but,
right.
Basically in between the original run of the show and then the motion picture. We all, saw the motion picture when we were younger, and we all had, clear memories of, when it kind of came back full force for the next generation and all that stuff. So it's a good, I feel like we're in a good spot pop culturally.
Yeah, and it's interesting because you are all certain types of fans, just fans of that kind of lost era, where, like, I have a Star Trek podcast. I consider myself to be a big fan, although I meet fans all the time that are like, whoa, I'm barely a fan compared to you. And yet you guys, mostly, your show focuses on TOS, but some of the other guys on the show have very little exposure to Trek, outside of TOS and maybe TNG. And I think that's really interesting. Whenever I run into fans like that, it's like, oh, you just like stopped at TOS. Something about the new Trek you kind of bounced off, or there's just something about that time period that you like. And you get that as well with the films. Like, you'll get people who are they love the Star Trek films, love them, but have never thought, should I follow that back to TOS, or should I get deeper in? Because I feel like everybody who is our age watched TNG, whether they're a Trekkie or not, should I follow that into other Star Trek shows? It's like, nope, this is the slice of my pie right here.
Yeah. Yeah. It's I'm guilty of that as anybody else. I watched Next Gen when it was on, and then the rest of it I'm just kind of bits and pieces here and there.
Yeah.
I ended up on the Babylon 5 side of Babylon 5 Deep Space Nine, and then never I never kind of went back and picked it up, and just the little, but the universe that it exists in, I love exploring that, and same thing. It's easy to draw parallels, I guess, from or rather to go back and retroactively see Star Wars going through some of the things that Star Trek was going through and being like, oh, hey, yes, man.
Yeah.
Although I not to generalize, maybe I just wasn't exposed to it as much, but I feel like the maybe it's just the age that we're living in, but the Star Wars fans tend to be more at each other's throats, and Star Trek fans, we're all just kind of like, whatever, we all love this thing, but
well, these days I feel like we're all in the same boat a little bit. I think that Star Trek definitely landed on a more repeatable formula, with its shows than Star Wars. But at this point of brand exponentiation, we're all kind of in the same spot where a new show comes out and it's like, okay, is this going to be something? Is this where I drop out, or is this where I need to learn to love this a little more? We're all running into that with like streaming services and stuff.
Right.
The last time that you were on, I asked about the degree and difference in your experience between Star Trek fans and Star Wars fans and their propensity for actuallying. And I'd imagine that fans of classic era TV and movies might be even more meticulous about their fandom. You might even get more complaints or corrections from people who love Mannix or something like that.
We get some, yeah, and especially we get with for the most part, it seems like it's with love, but we get these messages like, oh, you were talking about, like Dick Gautier for 20 minutes and nobody mentioned this. And I'm like, okay, well, still, there's a way to phrase that. You can be like, hey, like you guys were talking about this. Did you know that also, X,
right.
It was really popular, and not just like, oh, how could you talk about that for, but yeah, it's an interesting experience. I feel like in both cases, like we haven't waded too far into the existing fandom, with Star Wars Minute and with ABCDTOS. We're not like, actively seeking to be a part of, like, hey, we want to be, present company excluded. We're not like seeking out being like, oh yeah, I want to be on all the Star Trek shows and be a part of the scene. What's going on. And we like, obviously there's people that we like talking to that will do shows, that we enjoy, but we're not just looking to kind of ingratiate ourselves into the whole fan culture. We're not making it our identity, and not that there's nothing against that. It's just that we're just doing it kind of as a lark. Yeah.
You're comfortable with the slice of pie that you've got, I guess.
Yeah.
The culture of Hollywood in the 60s and 70s is it's like its own mythology. And there's, I made a joke about Hollywood Squares before, obliquely, but just the idea that you could have a show like that, I can't even imagine that existing now, or in a different, maybe an internet version of it. But it informs a lot of the appearances of actors in the TV shows of the time. And I don't think Star Trek is any exception to that. And you can see it in a movie like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I don't know if you've seen it, but where
I haven't.
In the movie, DiCaprio plays a character who had a show, a Gunsmoke type show, and then that show has gone off the air, and so now he's kind of bouncing from show to show, having guest appearances and wondering about his career. And I can't remember if Tarantino had said anything when it came out, but his character reminds me a lot of where William Shatner probably was in the 70s, post Trek, and just showing up in a Columbo, or doing Barbary Coast or something like that. Totally. And William Shatner beating the crap out of the Helter Skelter killers is like the best movie that the guys from Free Enterprise never made.
Exactly. Oh man. Speaking of that era, Shatner and by extension, oddly, Dick Gautier, have you the game show Tattletales?
I don't
Have you
think so.
seen that? Oh, it's totally. It looks like the set looks like it's straight out of like Gamester Triskelion. It's an odd, like very like bright, colorful '70s game show, and it's like a they're set up into couples basically, and there's the three teams of couples, and it's they're not always necessarily romantically coupled, but they're like at least friends, and there's a man and a woman, and they take out the men, and they they ask them a question while it's almost a little bit like the newlywed game kind of format, but they have a little screen and they show the other contestants with their isolation headphones on in an isolation booth, and they ask them some questions, and they make some kind of racy jokes, and it's the '70s, it's all that kind of a thing.
I think '70s, yeah.
But Shatner was on it a handful of times, and it's an odd thing to see that this kind of '70s Shatner, as a game show contestant, just being, still being him,
yeah, right,
very much so,
yeah. Being a personality,
yeah.
Speaking of old shows, I've since gotten a Roku since we last talked, and I'm now subscribed to the Starlost channel on Roku, so I can watch Harlan Ellison's Starlost whenever I want.
That's something I need to go back and check in on. I don't think I've ever, I think I've seen parts of them like maybe at a convention, set into like, all right, I need to cool for a bit. Let me go watch some Starlost in a screening room for a little bit.
Well, on ABCDTOS, you're getting near the end of the original series, and having watched it in such scrutiny with three other old TV fans, are there any new insights that you have gained about the original series?
Yeah, I think we have to, well, at least I can, speak for myself that I have a deeper appreciation for some of the behind the scenes kind of consistency, like watching them all in, it's not a short time. We're watching one a week, so it's it's taken like 2 years, but that we often talk about kind of the noticing when it's like, oh yeah, there's a certain consistency to some of these directors, or like, oh, that's like obviously like Gene Kuhn was gone by this point, and you can see this could have used that little bit of grinding into Star Trek format and stuff like that. Like the Pevney touch is something that we've talked about a handful of times. Like, oh, okay, yeah, I could see it. He had a handle on it. So like, when I was much like being a fan of comic books or anything else, the more you get into it, then the more you just kind of like start realizing, oh, the people behind the scenes who make this, like, things that I like sometimes are made by the same people. Let me follow that thread,
Yeah. That's part of that, being a fan of this sort of thing is being able to do that. The level of detail that you can get for early Star Trek productions is incredible. And I have to imagine doesn't exist for the Love Boat or something like that, or maybe it does, I don't know, or modern shows. I mean, people are still alive, you can go talk to them, but like if you hang around on Memory Alpha, you can find literal call sheets and like receipts for props, and they've sort of cataloged all these things. And of course, a lot of that exists for the film we're talking about today, like the histories, the conflicting histories, the oral histories of how a lot of these things got made. And it's sort of fascinating to see how different TV production was, but also how really it was the same in a lot of ways.
Yeah, it's a fraught, interesting history that ironically, it owes a lot of its kind of presence to Star Wars, which is also that's the it's both the reason why it exists as the motion picture, and perhaps the reason why people find it unsatisfying at the same time. Like it's why it got there and who it's being held up against. But the whole kind of phase 2 thing, and the kind of tortured process to get it there. I think that would be a good. There's my Star Wars Minute co-host Alex is excited because there's about to be this television miniseries about the making of The Godfather, like a dramatization, behind the scenes kind of dramatization of the making of The Godfather. And besides, obviously, there's stuff with Star Wars that we'd like to see that for, but that like kind of interregnum, like Weimar Star Trek would be a real interesting spell to take a look at. Just to, like as stuff starts bubbling up and there's fans kind of clamoring for more, and people starting to take notice, and Paramount being like, all right, maybe we got something.
And yeah, and a lot of the names like connected in the early days of this film to this film are names that end up in those same stories.
Yeah,
it was just kind of Hollywood at the time. Let's pivot to the other Star franchise for a bit. And at this point on Star Wars Minute, you've finished The Last Jedi. You're doing the Book of Boba Fett, and presumably you're on to Rise of Skywalker. And
we're gonna stop and do Solo, a Star Wars party.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And part of Star Wars fandom, part of your show has always been people's opinions, what people like and dislike about Star Wars. The movie you just did, however, and the movie that you are eventually heading into are unique for how contentious they are, even in Star Wars fandom. Does that mean that you have to approach them differently?
A little bit. We talked about that on, we started doing The Last Jedi, that we weren't going to pre-screen anybody, but for their opinions, we didn't,
guests.
Yeah, guests. We didn't want to have, only, forced, one point of view, but,
right.
we ourselves were, aiming to be positive, about the whole thing, because there's just we both, enjoyed The Last Jedi quite a bit, but there's also kind of a bit of a dearth of positivity lately, which, we're certainly guilty of to our, to a certain extent, that we were, the whole time we were doing the prequels, and anytime we were just kind of like, piling on, and then there's people just like, wait, these movies mean a lot to me. I like them. And I can't really listen to you guys just kind of insult them all the time. We're just like, that's weird. And now it's like, oh, I get it. Okay.
Yeah.
I see.
Right.
Yes. So we were just aiming to be somewhat positive, because, we like these movies. We like that one in particular, but we'll have some kind of a little bit, perhaps more split opinion with the going forward with Solo and with Rise of Skywalker. But we, didn't pre-screen our guests, but we ended up doing just having our guys in there, booked the show the same way, got a regular kind of, a bunch of show regulars, and threw in some new people. And it turned out that, mainly only one or two people just really were really disappointed with it. Some people, obviously, that's not, it's not free from criticism.
Yeah.
But a lot of people had issues with certain things here or there, but then overall, almost everybody that we had on really liked the movie. So it was a good, like, oh, okay. Like the loud part of the internet isn't always what, the real life thing.
Yeah, the internet is not real life. If that's your only takeaway, I think that's a good one to have for this show. I'm looking forward to your coverage of Solo and Rise of Skywalker, because, I don't think I'll get in trouble for saying this, but Rise of Skywalker, maybe not a well-constructed film. Solo, a lot of pressures from a lot of different quadrants on what that film is going to be. And I like that you guys provide a commentary from your own and from other guests' voices about, how you feel about it, what went wrong. It's not like something that's very popular in commentary now on the internet is just like this relentless, just pointing and laughing at something, the criticism.
Right. Yeah.
And going from that right into, what did you think of the Book of Boba Fett?
Definitely had things that I liked and things that I wasn't so into, things that I feel like, to me, it seemed like there were definitely, perhaps behind the scenes, some things didn't come together the way they wanted. And I'm not sure what, if that's just me speculating, but, it was, they're absolutely the things that I liked. And I love just kind of, dropping into live action Star Wars for an hour every week.
Yeah.
But, overall, I feel like it kind of lost its way a little bit. But the good news is there's more around the corner.
There will always be more at this point. Yeah. Yeah. Something that I think both Star Trek and Star Wars are going through is this, the new shows are walking the line between good storytelling and just the obvious cynical commercialism that comes with being a big property. And so, you get something that is like The Mandalorian or something like Boba Fett, a character that people have wanted to explore forever. And how much can you focus on them and how much of the show becomes your attempts to sort of set up other things, to create your universe, and it can be frustrating. Like something like Star Trek Discovery, I think it's a great idea. It's set in an unexplored era of the franchise and with new characters. But now we're going to get, the Book of Captain Pike, the new show, which is just taking characters we already know and putting them in the exact same era and doing the same thing, kind of like with Boba Fett and The Mandalorian.
Yeah. I can't think if we talked about this on my show or if this is a conversation I had off the air, which conversations that I don't have on a podcast are fewer and further between these days. So,
right.
But I think a good, I would love to see on Paramount Plus or wherever, basically just do a new, like the 5-year mission of a different show in the TOS era and do your best to create, verisimilitude of having the show happen in that same, you wouldn't be able to tell except for the high video quality that it wasn't filmed in 1968. You know what I mean?
Sure. Yeah.
Like, cause a lot of the stuff that's like, oh, well, now we're talking about this era that happened, before Star Trek, but everything looks fancy and new and we can do that all you want. And that's, I'm not saying that they shouldn't do that, but I'm saying, I think there's a certain market market segment that would enjoy that kind of, that campy, brightly colored kind of 60s feel and that retro feel and just do like, none of the characters that we know. Every once in a while you can throw one through there, but have it, just do a 5-year mission of, hey, go back to its roots and make it like, oh, we're following the Yorktown for 5 years.
Yeah.
And, that kind of a thing and make it a little bit goofy, campy, fun, but also, I think there are writers who would be into that. I think there's a certain kind of retro vibe that people would go for.
Yeah.
But
it seems like that's what Strange New Worlds is aiming for, and we'll see how well they do that or how much they want to cleave to that. Have you gotten to see Prodigy at all?
No, I'm way behind on everything Star Trek, which is, I have Paramount Plus, but mainly because it's the only way to watch the original series episode streaming, I think at this point. And so it's like, one of these days I'll get to the rest of it.
Yeah,
perhaps. I really want to, but I've heard good mixed things, but mostly positive things about a lot of the new shows. And
I think Prodigy in a lot of ways is following much in the same way that perhaps the motion picture followed in the footsteps of Star Wars and other movies that came before it. Prodigy is sort of following in the footsteps of Clone Wars. Mm-hmm. It's been compared a lot, I think, to Clone Wars and to Star Wars properties, but it is presenting, a ship with 6 new characters who are all kind of doing their own thing. And then 10 episodes in, we introduce a bunch of elements from a previous Star Trek show, and then it becomes continuity porn.
Right.
Which is just the way things seem to go now.
Yeah. Yeah. That's reading the one recurring thing that happens on ABCD TOS is that, I start reading some backstory and I'm just like, oh, they went back to this in Enterprise. Maybe I should watch Enterprise. I'm like, I'm not going to be, I know nothing, I'm sure lots of people like Enterprise, but I know me going into that, looking for that, I doubt that I will be satisfied with the result that I get from going to watch this episode of Enterprise just because they're, hanging out with the Tholians or whatever.
Right. Well, when I got in touch with you and told you that we'd be talking about the films of Star Trek on the show this year, you said that you'd be interested in talking about Star Trek: The Motion Picture, and I kind of had a feeling that would be the case. But why did you want to talk about the motion picture today?
Well, there's a recurring theme in my life that, I was like, oh, no, nobody's claimed the motion picture yet. I'm like, no, probably not. Of course not. That's a similar. I have to keep recognizing, and you would think after 40 years of this being kind of, the way that my life goes, I would realize that the things that I'm super into aren't necessarily always the things that everybody else is super into.
Right.
But this was part of my canon growing up. I will often reference this kind of, it's become lore at this point that I had a handful of Betamax videotapes that I would watch all the time growing up. And it was, the Star Wars Empire Strikes Back, the first half of the Star Wars Holiday Special, because the second half got taped over, or nobody realized that it was really going to be 2 hours long, because that didn't make any sense.
Right.
So somehow I only ended up with the first half. But then also the Star Trek: The Motion Picture, The Black Hole, and I think one or two other things ended up. I think with my parents, we had 2001, but my parents would watch it. I didn't watch it that often. This is just kind of like sci-fi sacred texts that I would watch over and over again as a kid. Yeah. And this was always part of it. And I had, again, perfect timing that in that Star Wars generation, I also had, action figures from this movie and all this other stuff. And then whatever that era was that we got those tapes, then we did. Maybe it was just being a Betamax family, or just changes in my family, because we moved around that point, and a couple of different other things kind of fell apart. But I never really got the later ones on video until it became like me seeking them out on video. You know what I mean? So like, yeah. The same thing with, my relationship with Return of the Jedi is I saw it in the theater, and a lot of the other, Star Trek motion pictures movies I saw in the theater, but then they weren't as personal to me because I didn't own them and watch them over and over again until, being, in my preteens or teens or 20s in some cases, depending on when. But this is a deeply, I don't want to say it a deeply personal movie to me. That makes it sound kind of like
that's fair.
It makes it sound more important, more stodgy than it is. But this was just totally one of my movies.
Yeah, it's interesting that cinema in America obviously went through huge changes in the 70s, but the way that sci-fi became more serious as well is interesting. And there's a lot of sci-fi films of the 70s that really only in retrospect are looked back on as being groundbreaking, even though amazing things were happening behind the scenes, and amazing concepts were being, put on film. You mentioned The Black Hole, a film that's all but forgotten, I think, by most audiences, but of course fans remember and look back on. And I think that in a lot of ways, without the ensuing franchise that would go on forever and will go on forever, like Star Trek, I wonder where the motion picture would sit coming out as it did at the end of the decade, post 2001, post Star Wars, if it would just be seen as kind of an oddity, like The Black Hole.
Yeah. I don't know what, at what point, because obviously they would have gone back and retooled it at some point. I don't think they could just left a
I'm waiting for the Black Hole alone. Reboot at this point.
Yeah, that I mean, we'll get there potentially. Now Disney Plus can bring everything back, but
Disney Plus show.
I think that the at some point they would have gone back to the franchise and brought back some form of Star Trek, but it would be interesting if this had just been kind of left alone. And we speculate that with Star Wars every once in a while too. Like if Star Wars is just a one-off, I think it's, as much as it's a huge pop culture thing, I think it's kind of critical cultural standing would be higher, because it would be almost more like 2001 or something that stands on that level, where it was just kind of like, oh, this is amazing movie, sci-fi movie that had amazing effects and just kind of dealt with this thing, and then it wouldn't be the franchise juggernaut, the marketing kind of empire thing that it is today. So we would, it's easy to dismiss as just like, oh yeah, they're just making these as a money grab.
Yeah.
If you didn't have any sequels, it would just be like, oh man, this movie that came out was such a thing.
There'd be a huge Battlestar Galactica franchise instead.
Right. Yeah.
And you guys would be covering the Book of Mormon on your show. I was thinking about that philosophy, just being an early listener of your other podcast, Star Wars Minute, the philosophy that you introduced to me very early on in your show, which was the idea that, like, what if all this never happened? What if all these movies and novels and video games never came out? And as far as Star Wars goes, we don't know anything about the Force, the Jedi. They're just weird guys in robes who maybe tapped into something or maybe cultivated that mystique for their own advantage. Like, that's an interesting thought experiment. Obviously, like, George Lucas didn't share that idea when he was making Star Wars, see the Journal of the Wills and the prequels and everything else. And I think there is a Star Trek version of that, you know, where we never get the updated aesthetic and the attitudes of TNG and all the sequel series, you know, where Star Trek just remains this fusion of military space fiction of the early 20th century with as much 60s psychedelia as Norman Spinrad or whoever could jam into it. I don't know. I don't know if that's like a scary idea, or like, if you said like somebody would have done something with this idea.
Yeah. I don't know if it would have been a total reboot. You know, it would have been essentially the equivalent of the you know, Kelvin timeline J.J. Abrams movies, but like way earlier.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Or if it would have been, I don't know, interesting to see what they would have done. But you know, luckily we don't have to speculate because we've got these examples.
We absolutely do. Yeah. I'm just thinking about like a world where, you know, space is like what TMP presents, you know, where space is scary. You know, our adventurers are like explorers going out there, but there are amazing things to experience, and like the trip is worth the trouble.
Yeah. I mean, I like to say that, you know, this is the most Star Trek-y of the Star Trek movies.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
It you know, it comes and goes, but this is like the at the heart of what I feel like Gene Roddenberry envisioned Star Trek to be. There's, I mean, you know, his opinion of what it was, you know, varies day to day, it seems like, but you know,
yeah.
There's a lot of mythologizing done of Gene Roddenberry, but I feel like, you know, at its heart, this is always this, you know, like talk to the alien instead of blowing them up kind of a thing.
Yeah, right.
That this gets, you know, this doesn't end with a big explosion. Well, it kind of does, but not like, you know, it doesn't end in a big battle the way that, you know, as much as I love Wrath of Khan, it has some amazing, very Star Trek-y moments. It's at its core, it's an action movie. You know what I mean? And there's room in Star Trek for that too. That's the beauty of it. But like, I feel like that's the main kind of tenets of Star Trek of like, oh, let's go explore, find, you know, new life, new civilizations, you know, like, you know, to literally boldly go where no man has gone before. And in this case with Decker and all that, it's like a, you know, it's getting to the heart of it, but then the way it was executed, I can see where, again, it's because like it only got made because of Star Trek, but people holding up it against Star Trek are going to be disappointed because it's a little bit of a holdover from that pre-Star Wars movie making, you know, the kind of a slower, more deliberate, not to say that things afterwards aren't deliberate, but that kind of, you know, late 60s to early 70s kind of vibe to it, but then it came out in a new era that it wasn't really ready for.
This is probably a whole nother conversation on a different show, but there is an interesting dichotomy between the idea of, like you said before, Star Trek being this forward-looking thing, which is based in a lot of ways on an old show and old storytelling techniques. And you've got Gene Roddenberry, a guy who, to hear him tell the story, has had to fight tooth and nail to get every idea that he's ever had, you know, into something, and constantly has this taken away from him. And then you've got George Lucas, a guy who is creating this new way to tell these sci-fi stories that is based itself on 1940s serials and samurai movies, but yet he owns everything. So every idea he ever wanted to put into it until he sold it, like, got into it. And how Gene Roddenberry is, you know, a baby boomer who fought in World War II and was making his progressive show, and Lucas is a, you know, guy who was basically making a story, or trying to make a story about colonialism in like Vietnam and that sort of thing, and how that's kind of ended up. And anyway, like I said, probably for a different show, but it's an interesting idea.
Well, yeah, it's a good, and the idea that I forgot where this came from. There's some definite kind of source on this that I'm not making up, but there's the idea that when Lucas was first developing Star Wars, you know, he's sitting around with that infamous yellow legal pad, you know, and his pencil writing notes, right? That he watched a lot of Star Trek while doing that. And that, so not only is it, you know, the behind the scenes struggle to get from point A to point B played out, you know, in Star Trek, but then that being one of the influences that Lucas brings in when he's able to do whatever he does. It absolutely could be a whole different, Star Trek into Star Wars, that journey, which was a good. No, now I'm thinking about that. That's a good, because that could also be a part of that. That we that behind the scenes kind of like that Godfather show, like the making of the motion picture could also kind of draw from that. Just Star Wars being something not necessarily derived from it, but certainly something that influenced George Lucas, and then becoming what it ended up having to be judged against is an odd.
Yeah, I know a lot of Star Trek fans were excited about the. I haven't seen it yet, but the being the Ricardos film, about Lucy's early days and sort of her connection to Desilu, and of course where Trek came from. Yeah. And of course, I doubt the movie deals with that at all. But I think that is set in that world that we're talking about. That sort of behind the scenes world that people are interested in now. Well, talking about going behind the scenes, let's talk about the technical details of the film really fast. We are talking about the first TOS film, Star Trek the Motion Picture, released in America on December 7th, 1979. The screenplay was by Harold Livingston, or is credited to him. Livingston is a novelist and a screenwriter who, before the motion picture, had written episodes of the TV series Mission Impossible and Mannix for Desilu. He also wrote for the TV series Barbary Coast, which I mentioned before. And he doesn't have a lot of film credits. He has 3 of them, and this is his last one, so no more films after this. The story is credited to Alan Dean Foster, and Foster is a very prolific fantasy and sci-fi writer who has written many adaptations of sci-fi films and TV shows. He famously ghostwrote the novelization of Star Wars, as well as the Splinter of the Mind's Eye follow-up novel. And he wrote the novelization of several of the Alien films, as well as Dark Star, The Black Hole, and the Trek animated series novelizations as well. Mm-hmm. The film was directed by Robert Wise, who, if you're a film fan, needs no introduction, but suffice it to say that he directed West Side Story, The Sound of Music, The Day the Earth Stood Still, and many other films, including the war drama The Sand Pebbles, on which he worked with composer Jerry Goldsmith. And Wise is... he's an interesting choice, and of course he's a huge part of the story of this film, but he's a guy who you would say, oh, the guy that directed Sound of Music, perfect for Star Trek, but his entire career reads like he's trying to fill all the squares in a bingo card. Like he has directed a lot of different kinds of films.
Yeah, he's all over the place, but then again, like talking about that, the Pevney touch almost, that you can see like, oh, okay, there's things here. This is, he's good at what he does, and it's fairly consistent, even though he's jumping around genres.
There was, I can't remember why I saw this now, but I think I was watching like a video or listening to commentary about the film, and they talked about the recreation deck scene in the film, where everybody is there. And they pointed out that in a bunch of other Wise films, there are similar scenes where kind of an all cast scene where for whatever reason, he's sort of bringing the entire company together and kind of showing you the scale perhaps of the story that he's telling, or just sort of like, wanting to do an all cast number, if you will. And of course, in the rec deck scene in this movie, everybody in the crowd, if you were, is made up of production people, families of the cast, and just getting everybody they can into this big room.
Yeah.
Jerry Goldsmith. Jerry Goldsmith composed the music for the film. Of course, one of the most beloved composers of all time. Some of the films he's worked on include Patton, Chinatown, Alien, Poltergeist, Gremlins. He also composed the scores for Star Trek V, First Contact, Insurrection, and Nemesis, and the theme to Star Trek Voyager. And of course, his theme for this film was rearranged by Dennis McCarthy as the theme for Star Trek The Next Generation. And like you, I saw this film when I was very young, probably before TNG came out. And I never really, I guess I wasn't paying attention to music back then, but I never really made that connection. And then there was the middle period for me. Hopefully I've got a later period coming, but the teen years where you watch this film after you've seen all of TNG and you're like, oh, that's just so weird to have that theme play when you see the old Enterprise come out. Yeah. And then now I watch it and it's like, of course, that's the perfect theme for this film. And when Kirk re-meets the Enterprise, we do as well. It's a triumphant piece of music.
Yeah. Yeah. I have a friend he's notable for being a little bit slow on the uptake for that kind of a thing. He's a very smart guy, but I forgot we were watching at some point we were watching the motion picture in the last 20 years, and he was just he was aghast. He was like, "Did they special edition this? Why did they put
Right.
the next gen theme
Yeah.
song on this movie? Like what?" And he was up in arms, and it's like, "No, dude, this is the Star Trek the motion picture theme. This is what it is.
Yeah.
They use that for the next one." He's like, "No." Like
Yeah. There's an interview. I think there's an interview with Goldsmith on one of the DVDs. Maybe it's the director's edition that came out in 2001, where he talks about the infamous scene, the dry dock scene, and how he had a different cue, and it was similar. It was, essentially the same thing, but it had a different tonality to it. And he had worked so hard on this, and he brought it before Wise, and Wise is just like, "No, not this. Do something else. Give me more for this, because this is Kirk being reunited, with his lover at this." And so he came back and gave us what we got.
It's an interesting, it's absolutely for the fans too, and it's such a weird it's like the people who really like Star Trek are going to be into this, but then also there's not a disrespect. There's a different or there's just we're not really gonna cater to the people who might not be huge Star Trek fans, who just are casually watching this, it's not enough to put them off. Like I'm a bad example because I grew up as a Star Trek fan and watching this movie, but it didn't occur to me that this was a long, quote unquote, long, boring sequence until years later when somebody was complaining about it. I was like, really? What? Oh,
yeah.
But it's such an interesting thing to give the fans their moment and not really. I feel like that would have been totally reined in these days with we got to worry about all the people who haven't seen it, and for a show that's so fraught with kind of executive interference to figure out how they came out of this with that sequence more or less intact is unusual.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe it's just because the weight that Wise had, that he was just like, "No, this is the way it's going to go," and they were like, "Okay."
Yeah. I think a lot of it was Wise. I saw an interview with the recently passed Douglas Trumbull as well, who talked about we worked hard on this, and he understood the emotion of the scene, and he said, "No, we want to have a lot in there." That is a weird scene. It's talked about being hours long. It's depending on how you start the timer, it's probably around 4.5 or 5 minutes long. I mean, it's long for a movie scene, but you really have to give it to Shatner, who in that scene he's giving you a lot. He looks like he's going to cry at one point when he sees the ship. And then you've also maybe they cut back a little too much, but you've got the interplay with him and Scotty. And so Kirk is watching it, and Scotty's watching him watch it, and Kirk is watching him watch it. And
we're watching them watch each other.
And we're watching them on the outside. And yeah, I was thinking the other day, being somebody who has just always been into Star Trek, even the very first Star Trek movie doesn't go, "This is what a Star Trek is." You are coming in having to kind of know who these people are, at least a little bit. And that's always an ask. There's always a buy-in for every Star Trek movie, but except for maybe 2009. But yeah, even at this point, they're like, "No, this part is for the fans. This is for the people who basically helped us, bring this to the screen."
Yeah. Yeah. And I wonder how much they were confident that it would go beyond this, if at all, at that point. I don't
know.
Because it's such a neat, obviously I appreciate the end result, but it's such a neat thing just to okay, you got one shot, one swing at the bat as far as and just to take it to be like, okay, well, let's deliver more or less a gift to the people who have loved the show and supported it, and not thinking about okay, what can we do to make this into a bankable money-making franchise. And I'm sure there was some thought given to that, and whether or not it plays out that way is interesting, but I love the way that it's true to Star Trek, and it's true to the Star Trek fans, which is part of why I like it so much.
Yeah, it's hard to know how much they really thought about that. I mean, now it's whatever else you're thinking, you're also thinking, how do we make a franchise out of this? But I'm sure it was on their minds. But we'll talk about some of the motivations behind creating the film in a little bit. First, I wanted to say that the movie is produced by Gene Roddenberry, and I should mention that all these men, save Goldsmith, share a 1980 Hugo Award nomination for Best Dramatic Presentation for the movie. The stardate for the movie is 7410.2. What that means, We don't know exactly because they hadn't quite figured it out. There is no definitive calendar date for the film, although the 2270s or around 2275 is kind of posited based on some of the statements made in the film and also the length of the 5-year mission that we presume went off without a hitch and they came back. And your assignment, Pete, if you can, is to give us a 25-word synopsis of Star Trek: The Motion Picture.
Oh boy. Well, there. 25 words. No, I don't know. That's.
What's the log line for the film?
Yeah. I'm counting on my fingers as I do this.
Not to be that accurate.
Let's see. Retooled Enterprise encounters new life form that I'm trying to do it too. I'm turning it into like Telegram. Like right. Retooled Enterprise and got this new life form. Stop. Am I doing it so that I want somebody to how much am I giving away? That's the thing. Am I logging it for somebody who's just, I want to leave it kind of mysterious, but they are encountering a strange new life form that who knows what could happen? Or is it just kind of it's a lost satellite that's turned into a living computer and wants to find its mommy?
I think the pitch, it's funny because if the more general the pitch is, the more versions of the script you can have, which is definitely true about the development of the film. They started with an idea, strange thing comes to Earth. And
right.
then, 3 or 4 different iterations of this film as it vacillated between becoming a pilot series for a Paramount network to a feature film, all kind of feature the same kernel of a plot.
Yeah, which, they had even used, but again, it's the most Star Trek-y because they've done it before and would continue to do it,
Well, it's the changeling is what nobody really wants to say. Yeah.
The I forgot where I read it, but somebody called it, where Nomad has gone before.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So it's okay.
That's perfect.
We've got that.
Yeah.
And that's what I should have done for the 25 words. I should have just called up the Google description of the changeling.
Right.
But yeah, it's they're trying to be, Star Trek-y. So you get this, they find this thing and then it even though it's destroying essentially they're it's headed straight for Earth. It's destroying everything in its wake, but it's, the way to deal with it is to communicate with it, which is such a
right.
I'll stop harping on that now, but I love that, just that concept of it, that it's the and again, going back to the encounter at Farpoint, the first Next Gen episode, you go to that same thing, and then and it's telling that perhaps Next Gen and the movies are more successful when Gene Roddenberry and that concept kind of take a back seat or ejector seat or whatever,
Yeah.
But
I guess it depends on if you consider Farpoint to be a success. It's a success in that it launched, the modern Star Trek franchise, but not considered to be a great script by a lot of people.
Yeah. And the going logic, everybody's like, oh yeah, Next Gen is great. Like you could just skip the first 2 seasons, start with 3, and it's just but come on. So I don't know. It's tough to separate, the vision of Star Trek from the actuality of Star Trek, and we need both. I guess that's the beauty of it, that it bounces back and forth. That you can have this, ideal, and then next episode you could just have, a submarine movie or a
yeah, right,
or fight 'em up with an alien.
They're not discovering much in Star Trek 2
No.
or possibly any of the other Star Trek films. But yeah, repeating that idea of here's a Gene Roddenberry script. There's something we don't understand. We learn that we don't need to necessarily be afraid of it. And we, gain from the sharing of the experience. And then somebody's probably wearing a shirt and no pants.
Right.
That's a woman. Yeah. I should just point out as we talk about the origins of the film, there's no way we can chart, and there's no way you'd want us to chart them meticulously. We'd be here all day. But if you want the nitty-gritty details of how the film came to be, there are many texts that you can check out. Specifically, the article for the movie on Memory Alpha has an incredibly detailed timeline using a lot of those resources that we talked about before. Any random thought that anybody's ever spared for this project is on this thing. And it's compiled from reference books, oral histories, commentary tracks, anything you need to know.
Yeah, they're behind the scenes, their production history starts in late 1967. So it's amazingly oh, okay, the show is still happening at this point, basically.
Yeah.
They're still, it's totally thorough.
With the show leaving the air, even in the early 70s, the article talks about this, but people just alive today know that people love the show still. And there's that idea of the executives who, a messy sort of acquisition and merger is going on at the time. But at some point, somebody looks back and looks at the numbers and goes, oh, we shouldn't have canceled that. That was dumb. But we've got this property still. What do we do with it? And in 1973, Gene Roddenberry, who by all accounts was sick of working in television, yet had experienced a massive failure with his 1971 feature film, Pretty Maids All in a Row, he still wanted to be part of the action, a piece of it, if you will. And he went to Paramount and said, I've got an idea for a movie. And one of his ideas was one of the original one-line story ideas from the Star Trek Is Pitch document, which was a question of cannibalism, which he retitled The Cattleman, which is about space explorers finding a planet where sentient creatures are being raised for food. And that didn't fly with the studio. I think Herb Solow, the producer of the original series, said, it didn't make for an enjoyable night at the movies. But the executives started thinking about the possibilities inherent in reviving the property. And so much so that in the wake of the success of films like 2001 and other sci-fi films of the time, Paramount footed the bill for developing, special effects subsidiary companies like the Future General Corporation and Magicam, which were FX houses run by Douglas Trumbull and John Dykstra, respectively, who of course would go on to revolutionize movie special effects and end up working on the original Star Trek film. And there's a crazy story about how once they got the film rolling, they went to Trumbull, who at that time was working on Close Encounters, I believe. But also he wanted to direct more himself. He had directed Silent Running like in 1972. And he said, I can't do this. And so they kind of went to another company called Robert Abel and Associates that had no experience. They had done like TV commercials before this. And so they completely underbid. And Paramount thought, this is great. You guys can do it for this much. And so they hired this company. And for the next 9 months, the company did nothing. They just kind of twiddled their thumbs. And I think they actually ended up making more TV commercials until Robert Wise or somebody came back on and said, what do you guys got? And they had nothing. I think they had some computer graphics for the wormhole sequence. And they're like, what? You guys are fired. You're so fired. And so they had to go back to Trumbull, hat in hand, and he came onto the film and brought Dykstra with him. And something that I love about the effects in this film is, miniatures and models would continue for a while in films, but this is a great example of, I think, one of the peaks of the art form. Not just for the ship shots, the Enterprise shots. Everybody talks about the dry dock sequence. Nobody ever talks about the V'ger sequence, which is probably 3 or 4 times as long, but is just in terms of physical effects and optical effects, what they're accomplishing, I don't think has been matched in many other films.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible that the only, I'm biased, like I said, because this is my where I'm coming from, but yeah, it does stuff I think on par with like 2001 or I've got a certain soft spot for the black hole with that those effects. Same deal, where it's just all right, there's a lot of interesting work going on here, the effects wise, and this the V'ger sequence kind of walks the line between that kind of the trippy weirdness of Jupiter and Beyond the Infinite from 2001 with the kind of more grounded sci-fi, and creates an amazing there are parts of it luckily a lot of things that I kind of digested before I had a critical eye, a lot of things that I still kind of treat as magic or sorcery, and I haven't spent a lot of time thinking about how they did any of the effects in the motion picture, other than some things that I now know. But
Yeah.
I don't dig. I'm just like, oh yeah, and they go to feature. Obviously, they go inside and they just walk in there.
Yeah, the whole sequence where they're drawn into V'ger, that long sequence, it's the same thing for me. Like, I understand how matting works, I guess, in like miniature photography and models, but I almost don't want the secrets of how it's made, just because the sequence itself, the combination of the film and the visuals, and then of course you've got to cut back to your cast. And they're all going, oh my God, this is so crazy. Right. But yeah, it's just amazing. There were a lot of different sort of initial permutations that this idea took, because, you know, a lot of people know that much of the pre-production, pretty much all the pre-production of Star Trek Phase 2, the proposed sequel series, went into this. But a lot of people don't know that this, you know, started as a film and vacillated between the idea for a film and the idea for a TV show that's going to launch, you know, the then UPN, I suppose, the Paramount Television Network, before finally becoming a film. And the initial idea for the story went through a lot of different phases. I think initially, Roddenberry, he developed a pitch called the God Thing, or what has come to be known as the God Thing.
Right.
Which is this idea that we were talking about, you know, something that is unknowable, that seems to think it's a god or is somehow connected to some kind of divine idea, is coming to Earth. And so you're dealing with that. You're also introducing the idea of the crew being older and feeling kind of worn out, and all of those things sort of merging together. And it makes me think, like, it starts even in the no motion picture, are all Star Trek movies about the crew feeling old and worn out and having to find like their new inspiration to like keep doing what they do?
Pretty much.
It seems like it. Yeah. Even the Kelvin universe films have sort of cleaved back to that with Star Trek Beyond. And if there is a Star Trek 4, you know, we'll have to see if that continues. But I just think that's funny that every Star Trek movie is like, I guess we'll do one more of these. I wonder if Star Wars could get away with that.
I mean, it did a little bit. That's the
The sequels,
idea of like old man Luke being like, I don't want to take part in your Star Wars.
Yeah. I wonder as the fans get older, if that will be, we can connect to that now. All the movies are about old people going, all right.
I'll go see a Star Wars.
One more of these. That idea was rejected. They kicked around some more ideas and actually got in touch with other writers like Ray Bradbury, Harlan Ellison, Theodore Sturgeon to all submit ideas. I think Ellison had some idea about lizards, zombie lizards or something like that. Mm-hmm. Silverberg and D.F. Black developed an idea about a black hole threatening the universe. And Gene and John Povil, a writer and producer, worked on a time travel story that would involve the Klingons getting their hands on the Guardian of Forever and changing history in that way.
Right.
The movie became a TV show. The TV show would later become a movie. But at the time, the idea for the pilot of the TV show was an idea that was based on a story by Alan Dean Foster. But the treatment itself was based on an idea by Gene Roddenberry called Robot's Return, which had been a story proposal for a Genesis 2 episode. That never happened because Genesis 2 didn't go. Mm-hmm. But in that story, a race of androids would return to Earth from space, having evolved to near godhood, and find themselves in a similar situation where, you know, how do they relate to their creators? And then they were sort of like off to the races after that. Apparently, it was a very snap decision to go, no, movie. No, seriously, this time it's going to be a movie. And one of the first people to figure that out or to learn about that was David Gautreaux, who plays Commander Branch in the film and was set to play Commander Zahn in the series. And it's funny, he's been very good natured about the entire thing. He'll do interviews about it. Yeah. It doesn't seem like he said basically like, hey, I was an actor. I knew like what the score was. Yeah. But it's so weird how it happened. Like he was literally going to sign his contract for the series. And he's like, what are you guys popping champagne for? It's like, oh, this is going to be a movie. And he's like, this is great. But it didn't turn out so great for the character of Zahn.
No. Yeah. I like that there's that, It's in one of the books, I guess, or is it on a video thing where they he's saying that Leonard Nimoy came to him later and was just like, look,
Yeah, yeah.
are you okay with the like? Are we good? Like years
I
later,
stole
like
your role.
because
Are
like
you okay? Are we
it was
cool?
kind of a like you're an up and coming actor who deserved that probably, but
Yeah,
and he was like, no, it's cool, it's cool.
yeah. Nimoy had not signed up. The entire cast did. Nimoy was doing, I think, Equus on Broadway. That was his excuse. Some people think it was unpaid royalties that he felt like he deserved.
Right.
So he wasn't on board, but then he was on board, I think partially because of Wise being involved. And so before they didn't have Spock, they needed to replace Spock. And I think it's fascinating what they did. They took the two halves of Spock and kind of made them two explicit characters. A full-blood Vulcan, Zahn, who would fulfill that side of Spock, and the character of Will Decker, who would be the human XO, which I guess in this case would be, if Kirk is going to be older, would be kind of a younger Kirk, what Kirk might have been like if he was less seasoned.
Yeah. Yeah, a little bit like, I mean, what we'll eventually see with probably a lot like what we'll eventually see with the Picard and Riker dynamic.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's an interesting, like there's a lot of what ifs that could be. Again, I don't trust in my heart. I'm very interested to see what Star Trek Phase 2 would have turned into. Mm-hmm. I do not trust in my heart that it would have led to the continuation of the franchise beyond, maybe 2 seasons of Star Trek 2, which we would have looked back on and be like, no, it's good. I could be wrong, but look, yeah. I feel like it would be like maybe 2 seasons of that, and then people would have been like, yeah, Star Trek.
I think that like TV sci-fi in the 70s that isn't, the Bionic Man or the $6 Million Man.
Right.
All the pilots that, that Roddenberry tried to get made are all interesting ideas. I'm not sure that they're all senses shattering ideas for a TV show that people will come to week after week. But
although it could have also, there was just like on the big screen. Yeah, I keep a list of essentially movies that were just purely only made because Star Wars happened.
Yeah.
And not to say that they're not, stuff like, like Flash Gordon, obviously it has its roots before that. And Star Wars is trying to be Flash Gordon. But there's, things that only made it to the big screen because Star Wars happened. And there's a similar thing that could easily happen with TV. So if you did have Star Trek, Phase 2 and it came out in, let's say, the 70s and was struggling a little bit, then maybe Star Trek could have, the tide could have boosted that ship as well, and maybe it would have continued a little bit beyond there. But
yeah, maybe Battlestar Galactica 1980 goes on, and is very successful after that. That's interesting. We were talking about The Godfather before, and there are a lot of things that it's all kind of interconnected. They spent a lot of money on this movie, and the budget is kind of, it was still a success or still profitable. In my research, you can't get anybody to really agree on a figure for how much it made, partially because of, just Hollywood accounting, but also the fact that a lot of the pre-production cost for the show was just folded into the film. So did it really cost $46 million, or did it cost 25, 30, and then the rest is, just like TV expense, which, the company foots the bill for anyway.
Right.
But at the time it was thought of as being, the most expensive film. I'm not sure that's totally true. Superman cost like $54 million. Adjusted for inflation, I'm sure like Cleopatra or something like that. But it was definitely the biggest film that Paramount had done since The Ten Commandments.
Right.
And if you get into some of the studio stuff, there's a lot of, I'm not sure if this is editorializing because Memory Alpha isn't Wikipedia. But in Memory Alpha, they talk about, the producers having a cynical idea behind it, thinking, well, we could make this a thing. We could create VFX companies that will then be hired by possibly a Steven Spielberg or someone in the future. How do we set up shop here? We've got this TV network that we're trying to make. We've got this TV network we've bought. We're a movie studio that is trying to get ourselves sort of back in the swing of things, and maybe this is the way to do it.
Again, it's an odd to jump into people's heads and be like, well, what were they trying to accomplish here? Besides, it is such a we do. I want that. I want this series now.
Yeah, the behind the Star Trek series. Yeah,
totally. As a dramatization, so you can get some weird, interesting.
Yeah. I wonder if you get people are so precious of Roddenberry's legacy, and so I wonder if you get a warts and all telling with Eugene Roddenberry as an executive producer,
right?
Or if you get the kind of sanitized Bohemian Rhapsody kind of story.
Yeah, that's going to be a sticking point. You would have to have it be kind of neutral so it could play both sides. But I don't know. I mean, it would still be interesting if not, if it was kind of stilted towards him being, this amazing great bird of the galaxy, whatever. It would still be interesting to see the other machinations going on. But I think it would be better and more compelling if it showed him as in a realistic light.
Yeah, I do too. A sci-fi madman.
Yeah.
We got to cut that out too. That's a great pitch. Star Wars, as you know, and as everybody knows, did a number on everybody in Hollywood. And I think it definitely inspired this film. Some people think that other films like Close Encounters, influenced the decision to go forward with this being a feature. I think that talking about movies that are kind of lost in a lot of ways to history, like Silent Running is, I think, a big influence on this. And of course, 2001, the influence of 2001 can't be overlooked.
Yeah, totally.
There's a lot of 2001 in this.
In look and feel and everything in like physically, like behind the scenes, there's, the technique wise, there's a lot of it in there. And then also just kind of that same feeling of, especially the kind of the end sequence where it keeps a foot more firmly planted in, quote unquote reality, but it also has that same feel of like a little bit of that Jupiter and Beyond the Infinite kind of when they're going into V'ger.
Yeah. And the themes or the tone of Star Trek still remains uniquely Star Trek, because I think you could debate the themes of like 2001 forever, but if it's, the idea that humans will always be their own worst enemy in a lot of ways, they'll always find ways to hurt each other with the things they make. And they're kind of irresponsible to things that they create, like artificial life. You've got a much, warmer take on that in Star Trek, which is, we don't need to be afraid of the unknown. And if we respect the things that we create, when they come back to us, we can learn from them. Although this happens in every iteration of Star Trek, but every time they find some amazing technology and it comes back to them, we never see anything happen with that. Like, there's got to be some Indiana Jones warehouse in the Federation where all the amazing things they learn are stored. V'ger comes back from the other side of the galaxy with full memory banks and transmits the information, and then we're
totally.
still wearing taupe and eggshell blue 70s clothes after that.
Yeah, we've noticed that with a handful of episodes that it's like, here's an opportunity that like, oh, this could have changed everything.
Yeah, they've got teleporters now. They can just go anywhere.
Yeah. That's with watching the original series, these moments where they, I think the computer in World is Hollow and I Have Touched the Sky, where it's just like, oh, okay, there's this vast thing that could advance our knowledge of everything.
Right.
But we end up not having and using it at the end. And what's the one that we just did, whose name I can never remember, but it's the one where the people take over the Kirk and Spock and Pulaski, but she's not Pulaski. They take over their bodies and they're trying to use them to further themselves.
Right.
I forgot what that one is, but that's another one where they're just like, oh yes, like all the this vast knowledge of a highly advanced civilization can be yours. And by the end, it's just like, no, we're not.
Yeah. Like, we can make android bodies, and put our minds in them and live forever. But do we want to do that, though?
Yeah.
It almost feels like, I'm not sure who the star of the film is. Possibly it's V'ger. I've heard people say that it's really kind of Decker's story in a way, and I don't think that the movie focuses really enough on Decker for it to be his story. Maybe that's probably one of the problems of the film, is that it's a little too scattered in its presentation. But it is certainly an interesting idea that Decker becomes this, future naut in a way, this explorer that in a way that like Kirk can never really touch. Like we don't know. He literally transcends, the bonds of our universe. He becomes something else. We don't really know, but that is the stated mission of the Enterprise and of Starfleet.
Yeah, I wonder how much, like, at any point did they consider basically swapping the role of Decker and Kirk in this? Decker's this guy who's thinks he's in command, but he's got a lot to learn, and here comes Kirk to kind of ruffle his feathers a little bit by taking over and then but by the end, then like I can't imagine that they didn't even consider, at least from Shatner's point of view, like, okay, at the end of the movie I get the girl and I go out in a giant blaze of glory. Like if they had Kirk doing that, and setting up that, like, okay, Decker had a lot to learn and now he knows more about command, so it's his ship now, for the future.
Kirk becomes the Star Child.
Exactly. And like, I wonder if they had considered that, because it seems like the DNA is there for them to set up that kind of a storyline. But again, it's there's a lot of little things that are just left not unexplored, but I would like to know more about.
Yeah, that's not on Memory Alpha. That's what I want to know.
Right.
That certainly fits, and I was thinking that as I was watching it, that would be a natural progression. But then you've got the idea of, if this is really for the fans, then they're not going to accept that they just got their crew back and Captain Kirk, is gone. He has become one with the prophets or whatever it is. And obviously we will come back to Kirk again and again and again throughout the other TOS films. But we get kind of a small, short version of the themes that he will wrestle with for the rest of the franchise, which is that he's still got it, but there's some tricks that he needs to learn. He needs to learn to broaden his perspective and respect his crew and let go of the things that he can't control and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And that's kind of really his only arc, as far as I can see in the film.
Yeah. I mean, he does get a little, and he learns. I mean, just it's something that does keeps coming back. But we kind of get it here in that he's not, he's the explorer. He's not even though a promotion seems like a thing that he wants, it's not.
Yeah.
He's not a desk jockey. He's a space jockey.
Yeah. This is really that point where it begins, the point where he becomes no longer that stack of books with legs and becomes the kind of renegade captain that most people think of Kirk as being.
Yeah.
Although he doesn't really, I mean, he pretty much follows the rules in this film. It's not like he does anything that he's not really supposed to.
Well, yeah. I mean, he kind of bends it a little bit in just, asserting himself.
Becoming the captain.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, buddy, you're demoted.
That's still kind of within his. It's like, well, it's not really breaking the rules, but
it's
rude, but not illegal.
Spock has a great arc in this film, I think.
Oh,
and
yeah.
Again, it's I don't think it's explored nearly as much as you could, but then of course we will explore Spock heavily in the next 3 films. But it's funny because I think both Kirk and Spock kind of have to relearn the lessons that they were constantly learning in the original series. And for Spock, it's, learning that, he's learning the lesson that connections are important, and that empathy is important, and that he always wants to be as Vulcan as possible and dominate his human side, but that the balance is important as well. And something I was thinking, and the 60s TV show, I don't think ever really worried about dealing with this, but maybe as we go into the 70s and then the later shows, does it make the Vulcans look bad? Does it repudiate the philosophy of the Vulcans that Spock, he almost becomes like a quote unquote perfect Vulcan. And then it's like, nah, but I'm not going to do that though.
Yeah.
Like emotions are clearly important.
It's a tough thing. And then, as that evolves, then a couple of years down the road, we get data. So replacing that struggle from one side of it to the other. Being like, oh, here's the person who doesn't feel emotions, and they're trying not to, and here's the person who doesn't feel emotions but wants to, and it's it is tough because I mean a lot of fun was had at Spock's expense for not. So I feel like it was it walked both, in the original series, it walks the line both ways, and that it's just kind of like presenting this thing as somewhat, I guess, depending who was writing that episode, either it's noble or it's something to be made fun of,
there's the difference, the evolution of Trek and the ideas behind Trek and infinite diversity and so on and so forth, I think have become more realized as the franchise has gone on, because of course, TOS is great. We've got a black woman, so we're diverse. And then let's go to every planet and just, spread American democracy. Right. And so the idea that that Spock he want something so much to be a quote unquote good Vulcan and then reject that is like, I don't know. It doesn't necessarily throw into question the entire practice of Kolinahr or anything like that. But I wonder if that would be dealt with differently, or if it's just that, like Spock says in the film, he has his own path. It isn't necessarily that. Like, I can't deny the fact that I am both of these things, and I want to embrace that, mostly because I have seen into the mind of another being, that is V'Ger, and realized, oh no, I don't want to be like that. I thought I wanted to be a computer, and I met a computer, and no, I'll be both things in my own way.
Yeah, I guess that's it. It's more of the being true to yourself, I guess, is the lesson that he is,
No Shakespeare references in this film, I don't think. Surprisingly.
Yeah, that's odd. I do. This is just something that I've been stuck on recently. Is the Ailea's theme, which I love, which they also use as the not the intermission, but the overture. To kind of let everybody know to sit down. Which don't get me started on overtures and intermissions, because I think we need them. They're due for a return. But the vocal version of that, the single, the 45 of that was released around the same time, is something that I discovered, like, as somebody who grew up, into this movie. I feel like it's, maybe like, 5-10 years ago, I discovered that there was a version with words, and it blew my mind. I was like, what? And so that's another really interesting, I guess that happens a lot then. And it happens, it's the, I think I was talking to my co-hosts about this a little bit. That's the same, like with, Poseidon Adventure and stuff like that, that every song's had a music tie-in then, and they do again now, but such an interesting thing that I never knew about it until way later. And Ailea in general, I feel like is a good, like, such an unusual character, but then also we end up doing it. How much of Next Gen kind of pulls its DNA from phase 2 stuff, but But I feel like Ailea as a standalone kind of like a one-off only in this movie character is such a really neat.
I wonder if it's we've talked about how Roddenberry has ideas that he likes, and whether he is consciously repeating them or he's just kind of cribbing from himself. I don't know, but maybe he thought that pairing, the idea of a character named William, who is a headstrong officer that's in love with a telepathic, sensual woman, was just too good to pass up. And of course, fans of TNG would say it is too good to pass up. Those are great characters, which have continued on to this day. But yeah, it is like, okay, I see what happened there.
Yeah, we didn't change much.
The transplant. Yeah, no, we didn't change anything really.
Yeah.
The Poseidon Adventure. I don't really, I have to confess that I don't really know if soundtrack sales on, say, LP or EP were the same as they are now. Now, when a movie comes out, you run out and get the soundtrack, if you're a fan.
That's the weird thing, that it's not, again, I grew up with the soundtrack to this movie, on vinyl, which I spent a lot of time. It's got this really cool, it really, the influence of Star Wars, I think, was catching up with it as it was produced. So, you get like the gatefold of the LP or the sleeve. At some point, basically, they've got this almost like a checklist of all the crazy aliens that you're going to meet in this movie, and
Yeah.
you barely see them in the background, as
Yeah,
just
right.
panning shot over a whole bunch of a whole bunch of species, a whole bunch of people from different alien races, but like the way that it play, I mean, I guess you could say the same thing for Star Wars. That if you showed me the same thing, you're like, wow, look at Greedo and Hammerhead, and they're in the movie for like 2 seconds in a bar. But
Yeah.
but the soundtrack didn't have that vocal version on it, which was part of why I didn't know about it. Like it wasn't like they came out with like the single version to sell more of the soundtrack. It was like odd, I guess, just trying to be, well, maybe this will be a hit. And then every time they play it on the radio, they'll say, hey, that's from Star Trek, the motion picture, now in theaters, So it's odd. I mean, I guess it made sense at the time. I don't understand marketing from the 70s, but I guess that's why it changed.
I guess it's another check for Jerry Goldsmith if it goes gold or something.
Right. Yeah, that too. And David Cassidy or Sean Cassidy. I always get them confused.
One of the Cassidys. It's like how Roddenberry, jotted down lyrics to the Star Trek theme in like 15 minutes to get his name on there.
Yeah. Now he gets royalties.
It would we'd be remiss to talk about music in this film and not, of course, talk about the blaster beam.
Oh, yeah.
Which is in other things, but whenever I hear it, I always think about the motion picture chiefly. Invented by former Star Trek actor Craig Huxley, who was Tommy Starnes on And the Children Shall Lead.
Yeah. And briefly, I think he's like the body of Kirk's nephew.
Oh, was he Kirk's nephew? Yeah, that's right.
Operation Annihilate.
Peter Kirk, yeah.
Yeah, it's such a, like, I've spent a lot of my life imitating that noise, either with my mouth or with, like something metal on a countertop or something, just like anytime I'm like,
yeah.
Such an odd, unusual sound that and again, like you said, it's been in other things, but it's so heavily featured in this that I feel like in other things it doesn't always get its just kind of sole focus being on this. It doesn't get to sing the way it does here, but they're shared DNA again. That's the Jango Fett's sound bomb, his sonic charges in Attack of the Clones.
Yeah,
apparently blaster beam, and it really it's one of those neat little things. But my friend Mike and I have been talking about doing a just purely Star Trek the motion picture based podcast, like a deep dig into it. Because it's something we're both kind of obsessed with, and he tried to reach out to Huxley to be like, hey, can we talk to you about this? And we haven't heard back, but again, it's been like 2 years now, so I'm not sure how. It seems like he's maybe we just went up the wrong avenues, barked up the wrong trees, but it seems like he's not like, oh, I did that and now I'm beyond that and I don't, like he's when the opportunity arises, he's proud of the work that he did and brings it back out and does.
Sure.
Happy to be a part of that thing. Star Trek's part of his life.
Yeah, and he's still a musician, I assume, and is into that. It seems like it'd be a very cathartic instrument to play. Like you've got you're using like a artillery shell as a slide, and you get to just hammer on this thing, and I feel like you'd be able to get some of your frustrations out.
Yeah, I wonder if like in person, does it have a feel that you don't get,
I wonder how loud it is if you have to wear earphones or something when you play it. I wanted to talk quick about the many sort of permutations that the script went through, we talked about, but also the fact that they, coming up to the end of the film, had no idea really how to end it. And one of the reasons for the ballooning budget was apparently Roddenberry coming back and going, well, no, let's do it this way. Or no, wait, I've got some new pages. And trying to, for a long time, they thought of it as a film with no third act, a film with no ending. And I think that that affected, with the other ongoing issues, affected how the effects were to be completed, because they didn't know how long they wanted the film to be and how long the shots would be. And I think I've heard Trumbull say that, one of the reasons a lot of the shots are so long is because they were just delivered as is. They were not really edited or timed down because they just didn't have time to do it. And Wise was editing the film, up to like the premiere. Like he personally delivered the final cut of the film to the premiere because he had been editing it the night before. And despite all that, I can't think of, we've talked about how maybe the impact of the movie isn't quite as good as some of the other stories in the franchise, but I can't think of a better end to a Star Trek story than this, the revelation of a mystery, the fact that we don't know everything, but we are important in the cosmos. We are there, that our adventure is beginning, but it will never end. Like, if they pulled that out of their ass, that's a good thing to pull out of your ass. I think they nailed it.
Yeah. Especially in tone with that kind of post Apollo optimism of 70s kind of space exploration and like the Carl Sagan kind of era, just being like, look, this is where we're launching probes out to the deep galaxy, and we're just going to find new things. Like we're doing it.
Obviously, there is going to be a Voyager 6.
Right?
Why would we stop sending Voyagers? Yeah,
totally.
Yes. Yeah, I think there was a cool detail about how JPL loaned them. I think like their final mock-up for the film, I'm not sure if it appears in the film, but to like design their own, Voyager prop. And the people at JPL were so excited. They're like, do you want like the prototype? We've got the prototype for the Voyager probes. And the studio's like, we can't ensure that. Like it's going to get broken, something's going to happen. So we're fine with what we've got. But yeah, even the JPL was excited about what Star Trek wanted to say.
Totally. And that synthesis, I love how Star Trek has always been kind of on board with the science and science fiction communities, like trying to, be as not hew completely to reality, but to be as feasible as possible.
Yeah.
And to be, true to obviously the sci-fi community. What was the thing with Asimov when they first came up with all right, in the end, like it's this intelligent computer comes back and is looking for its master, and the studio was just like, oh, intelligent computer, that we don't like that doesn't sound like, that sounds too far-fetched, nobody's going to be on board with that. So they're like, all right, well, wait, we got Isaac Asimov, who's the most famous person to write about it. He's a scientist and a science fiction writer. Here, what do you have to say? And he was like, yeah, of course this is feasible. Like it's totally, where we're headed. And they're like, I don't believe you, Asimov. But then like, was it Playboy or Penthouse or something ran an article about it, like with somebody from NASA, and they were just kind of like, and eventually we may have intelligent computers. And then whatever executive read it in the Skin Mag and was just like, maybe we could do that movie.
Finally, we've got it. Without Playboy, we wouldn't have had Star Trek.
Exactly.
There you go.
Well, that may be true for different reasons too, though. It's Roddenberry. It's true that we didn't really talk about the novelization. But if anybody hasn't read the novelization, if you're a fan of the movie and you're able to kind of stomach a good amount of really, I'll say, unnecessary sexuality, then the Star Trek the Motion Picture novelization is for you, because it's written by Roddenberry, and he manages to ladle a good helping of sex onto every single scene, where it's not warranted. Literally that, like the Enterprise flyby has, like there's sex in like every single scene, and it's just kind of like, okay, I get it.
Yeah. Well, as was his want.
Yeah, I'm no prude, but I was just like, okay,
sure.
come on.
Sure. And, we got through the whole episode without saying the word orifice, but until now, but for a movie in the 70s, like it could have been a lot worse, let's say.
Yeah.
It's somewhat circumspect. I quail at the idea of a sexy race that uses sex in all their interactions, and a beautiful representative of that race that has to have a vow of celibacy, written by a white guy with a voracious sexual history and appetite. But Could have been a lot worse.
Yeah, that's true. That little, but again, look, the way that nugget is, again, who am I to? I grew up with this movie, so maybe it's not odd to me, but I feel like that is thrown in there and not stepped over, but it's just like, all right, it's just, right. We talk about it once or twice and it's a thing, but it's not, the plot doesn't revolve around it, which is good.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, I guess
we cut 10 pages that Gene wanted to add, but yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, I guess that's the, what's the most alien thing to him is this unattainable, person who's adept at sex, but can't, you know what I mean?
Right.
That's
yeah.
That's so alien to him.
That's right. Yeah. Plus, he's a writer. You need conflict.
Yeah.
What if she just really loved sex and was great at it? No. There's
got to be something there.
Yeah. Well, Pete, thanks so much for joining me to talk about Star Trek and Star Trek: The Motion Picture. Yeah, I think it's fitting. If people want to continue the conversation, and they can at EISTpod on Twitter and the Enterprising Individuals Facebook page, where can people find you online? I
think I have everything linked to PeteTheRetailer.com. I say that I do, and then I forget to update it all the time. But I'm Pete the Retailer on Twitter, and StarWarsMinute.com as a link to the show, and I think links to everything there too. So
great. And of course, Solo coming up soon on Star Wars Minute. So look for that. Solo, a film that I'm looking forward to you guys' discussion about it, but a film that I think that didn't deserve what it got.
Yeah.
Could have easily have started a new Solo franchise, but I guess we'll have to wait for you guys' commentary on that.
Yeah, soon. It's coming.
Well, thanks again for joining me. We're signing off until the next mission. Hailing frequencies closed. Backtracking is back for an all-new season. Hi, I'm Caliban.
And I'm Gooey Fame.
And we'd like to introduce you to Backtracking, the podcast that explores the real-world inspirations behind your favorite episodes of Star Trek.
From historical events to classical literature to blockbuster films, we go where no pod has gone before to seek out the origins of classic Trek tales.
Did you know, Gooey, that the TNG episode Too Short a Season was an allegory for the Iran-Contra affair?
Yeah, only sweatier. Did you know that the Enterprise episode Regeneration was an homage to the John Carpenter film The Thing?
Archer and T'Pol freezing to death over a bottle of whiskey would have been a controversial ending.
As a dog lover, Archer would not like The Thing, I'm guessing.
Oh my god, movie night is canceled. Join us every other Thursday for a journey back to the beginnings of the Trek universe.
Backtracking is available wherever you get your podcasts.
No, Porthos!